Oh, hello there, and welcome to Phil Talking D20. So, today's video, as you might have guessed from the title, is a review, as spoiler free as I can promise, of the new Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor Amongst Thieves. So, where do we start? We're going to start with the fact that it's genuinely actually quite a fun film. It's not going to win any Oscars. It's not a new Lord of the Rings franchise. You know, it's not a massive epic blockbuster. Um, but what it does do, and this is quite fascinating, it does a very good job of being accessible, which doesn't sound very exciting when I say it like that, but it genuinely does. It borrows from some of the more current kind of heist trope kind of adventure arcs that we've seen from some of the kind of the more recent kind of 5e campaign books. Um, it has some good, funny in jokes for players and games masters. It has just enough touchstones to give you some fan service to the world. It's got some good tongue-in-cheek humour. It's got some kind of rogue and renegade turn good kind of heroism. There's some stuff to pull at the heartstrings, but not too much. It's very good at being soft touch on most things. There's some fun little Easter eggs. Keep a lookout for the cartoon characters from many, many moons ago. You'll see them pop up at some point in the movie. The villains are strong. You get a good flavour of what they're about and why they're doing it and what they want. And all the while, you've got quite good chemistry between the main cast, which is important. You've got obviously there's some friction, I do believe, shock horror, that it's not completely and utterly adhering absolutely to the core 5e rules. The obvious example of this is I say everyone, there are people chuntering about the fact that the tiefling druid can turn into an owlbear. And it's like, is that really a big deal? She's a tiefling, she's extraordinary already. You know, there's an argument to say that huge amounts of 5e games already utilize homebrew and rules tweaks. 5e almost, if I'm brutally honest with you, necessitates people to homebrew certain things. And if you want to do something in a campaign that's fun and cool, like allowing a druid to turn into an owlbear because they really want to, it's not really a big deal. It will literally just share the stats with something else that's akin to an owlbear, like a bear, for example. So I don't really have a problem with that. I was slightly perplexed by the magic items you see in the movie. I was like, it's vaguely familiar, or that's kind of one of those. But again, I've done some poking around, and they've released all the magic items from the movie as a free download from D&D Beyond. So you can chuck them straight in your game. There is an amusing scene with a slightly rotund dragon. They clearly encounter a high-level character who helps them out a little bit before kind of leaving and going on their way, and that has some good, funny in-jokes built into it. So it's not serious enough to spoil itself when it's being funny and silly. And it's serious enough to have some kind of heart and some kind of joy and some kind of sadness and some kind of hope and some kind of peril to keep you interested. But like I said, it's not going to win any Oscars. It was never going to win Oscars. It was never going to be a profound cinema event, the likes of which, you've never seen before in your life. If you like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and kind of classical fantasy adventure, it's genuinely a great film. A good example of this kind of to give you a kind of a feel for it, is it's films like 13th Warrior, Conan the Barbarian. They these kind of gamer movies that have these tropes in that kind of let us know that they're kind of with us and on our side. That's what this film does. It doesn't want to take itself too seriously, but it also doesn't want to completely make itself a laughing stock. And I think it treads a good line. You know, there were some good heart tug moments where, you know, there's some backstory. There's a great joke about backstory. But wait, you've not heard all my backstory yet. How many GMs have heard that? How many other players sat around the table have written like a 7-page backstory? They play fun games like that. You know, that if you're not into it, if you don't know Dungeons and Dragons at all, or kind of tabletop gaming, and you sit down, those jokes have enough scene setting within the movie for them to be mildly amusing. And if you are in on the in jokes, then they are quite chuckle funny. Which again, I don't think is a bad thing. And this is kind of why I go back to that start where I said it does a good job of being accessible. Ironically, personally, I believe it's better at being accessible than 5e itself actually is, because GMing 5e is not remotely accessible. It's a goddamn nightmare. Playing 5e, however, is accessible. And so if we are watching this movie, and so we are probably in the position of players, because that's the easiest way to watch this movie. We didn't have to direct it, we didn't have to act in it. That's the GM's job, or in this case, Chris Pine's job. Then, yeah, it's definitely accessible, and I think that's a real win. I also think that if this spawns a whole load of new people that want to play D&D, I think actually it gives them a really nice jumping off point. It gives them an idea that there should be some peril, that there should be some kind of heartstrings being pulled. There should be some sadness. There should be some loss. There should be some heroism. There should be a need for people to be able to kind of take risks and gamble. People should feel they can lose and try again and try to succeed if they weren't successful the first time. And I think there are some great kind of beats and great kind of story arcs. And again, I think there is a nod to the community at large when they display the characters. You've got this very strong, very capable barbarian. You know, Rodriguez, she's great. You know, she's great in the Fast and the Furious movies. She was great fun in Avatar. She's got presence. She knows what she's about, and she does a great job of being, ironically, much more in the Pathfinder 1 and 2 barbarian vein, which is strong female barbarian. Chris Pine, who he's a bit like, so he's kind of a bard. He's probably multi-classed. If we were going to like break down the characters, he's probably multi-class. He's probably at some point dabbled in ranger. He's probably at some point dabbled in bard and picked at rogue. He does a very good job of being the center linchpin of the party, without necessarily being the best combatant, which again was nice to see on screen. There's often this kind of I suppose element within parties of everyone looking to be the big damage dealer, the big heavy hitter, the person that's most important in combat. Whereas what they demonstrated there was a nice balanced party. And again, when I talk about if this film pushes out a new generation of people that say, hey, you know what, I wouldn't mind giving this a go, demonstrating that it's not all about combat, demonstrating that sometimes being sneaky and smart and being a fast talker is actually just as useful to a party as being a double-R bar steward barbarian is a brilliant thing to put out in a movie about Dungeons and Dragons, because, you know, the classic joke about the party of fighters, well, they're not going to get as far as they think they're going to get. They're going to do all right, but they're not going to get as far as they hope. They're going to be inflexible. So taking the time to think about simple petty things in movie parlance about having a good example of a balanced fun party. Brilliant job. Putting in some politics, giving us some scene settings. We go to Neverwinter. Did it look like a cool fantasy Neverwinter city? Yes, it did. It did a great job of that. Did they have a nice smattering of the kind of the wonderful and varied ancestries and kind of cultures that we see in D&D? Yeah, they dripped all that in. The halflings were great fun, and you'll know if you've not seen it. When you see it, there's a scene with a halfling where you're like, "Isn't that what's his name?" And you're like, "Yeah, it's definitely him," and it's a brilliant cameo, and it's very amusing. But also, on top of that, that scene is another one of those good points of backstory development, character motivation, that you see in these kind of, or you should see in good tabletop games when you're having fun with your friends. It shouldn't be 100% of the time, but it is important for your character to have motivations, for them to have wants and needs, and a bit of pain and a bit of suffering and a bit of kind of dream and desire that keeps them doing the dangerous job of adventuring. And I think they touchstone on that very well for all of the characters. The wizard sorcerer character with his cool little box of tricks and his spells, they use magic very well. It wasn't overly showy and overly over the top. It was subtle enough to be kind of cool and magical without it being too kind of garish and silly, which is I'm a fan of that kind of magic. I think when there's too much kind of bells and whistles and flashes and bangs and whooshes and crackles going on, you've lost me when it comes to magic. Magic is functional and exciting and serves a purpose, but it doesn't need to be all swoosh, moosh, noise, bangs, and whistles for it to still be cool. There is, again, a fun arc of a party that comes apart at the seams and has to be put back together slowly but surely. It's almost kind of, I mean, it's not, but it is a bit Blues Brothers in the way of we've got to put the band back together. And if you've seen Blues Brothers, you'll know exactly what I mean. And if you haven't, I still haven't helped you in any way. But, as I said, for piecing together some of the core elements of Dungeons and Dragons without it being too restricted and too inaccessible, I think this is a really good fun film. Your kids will love it. You'll probably enjoy it or love it. If you're really curmudgeonly, you might absolutely hate it because it's not canon. Because there are, like I said, some wobbles from the core rules. But again, that strikes me as such a really odd thing to be aggravated by in the 5e community, because people in 5e absolutely love to homebrew. That's why there is rules applicable kind of creations for Lord of the Rings. Star Wars has a 5e version that you can use the 5e core rules to play. 5e is literally just absolutely saturated with people's homebrew rules. Most tables are. So I think hopefully if most of us kind of set aside a very legitimate, very credible and very acceptable grudge with Hasbro Wizards of the Coast's behaviour of late, we don't need to go back over this old ground. They tried to pull a really dirty move on our community and we pushed back hard and we won. But it would be a shame to not go and see something, especially if you still genuinely like playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, many of you have got plenty of books on your shelves that you've already bought. So going and seeing this movie because it's something that we all enjoy isn't a bad thing. I mean, I'm obviously, if you don't know me, I'm a Paizo guy. I play Pathfinder 2. It's a much better game. Jokes. Don't get angry. Don't shitpost me to death. It's just my preferred system. But I still went to see the Dungeons and Dragons movie because I started playing 3rd edition D&D and 3.5 edition D&D 4 years before I fell out of love with 4th edition and moved to Pathfinder 1. So for me, the lore, the realms, the fluff and the flavour of Dungeons and Dragons is still very important to me, even if I don't really like or rate 5th edition. I'm not that excited about 1D&D at the moment either. They're not pulling me back in. Pathfinder 2 is much stronger for me in that regard. But if I wanted to run a Greyhawk campaign in Pathfinder 2, I could easily do it. You know, there's nothing stopping me. And I think the way that this film hopefully gives us a new generation of excited players, I think could be really positive. And because the overall plot of the film has those good drum beats of a decent short campaign, I think we're pretty lucky. It could have been a lot worse. I've seen the other D&D movies, and they're really not great at all. This leaves those in the dust, really, really in the dust. It feels much more credible as a movie. You know, you're not surprised to see it at the cinema. Does that make sense? If you go back and look for the original Dungeons and Dragons movies from, I think, the early 2000s, don't quote me on that, the acting is really ham and terrible. The plots are really zany and wacky and over the top. It's all very kind of Dungeons and Dragons on steroids. It's like, there's a million dragons. Why? Because it's Dungeons and Dragons. Well, yeah, but there's not a million dragons in Dungeons and Dragons. So this does a really good job of kind of smoothing over past mistakes. And the cast and the plot are very complete. But it's an adventuring party. They have an adventure, they are successful, they do adventuring things, and then it ends. But it ends very comfortably with the ability for them to just go off and have another adventure without it having to be completely and utterly tied into the first movie. It could quite easily have a sequel, but it could also just go off and do its own thing. They've done a good job of giving you an adventuring party. Hand on heart, I honestly wouldn't mind a decent high budget TV series to make up for some of the stuff that's going on with kind of fantasy at the moment. I mean, sure, lots of people like Game of Thrones and House of Dragons, but frankly, they're kind of lame. I'm not really someone that prescribes to the necessity for gore and tits to give me like a fix instead of decent story and fun adventure. And that's doing them down. Obviously, you know, they've got loads of tits and loads of violence in them. So I'm sure that makes them great. But I'm much more of a fan of films like 13th Warrior and Pathfinder that have something a bit more substantial about them other than how many people are going to die this episode. Wow, look, there's some tits and now they're dead. And this could do that in a big way. It could even, I think, muscle The Witcher in the way that The Witcher is already starting to look a bit like it might be losing its way. It's going to struggle. There's a good opening. It's already been proven that fantasy is popular and sci-fi is popular. We've seen the Star Wars TV series do pretty well. We've seen The Witcher and the Game of Dragons do well. This could be something that they put out into Netflix or Disney or Amazon or whichever one of the big providers waves enough cash under Hasbro's nose. And to touch back on the negatives, Hasbro wants Wizards of the Coast to make more money. A decent big budget TV show that gives us these actors because they're available. Do you know what I mean? It's a clever cast in the way that no one actor is absolutely gargantuan. They're all kind of well chosen, not mega budget. Chris Pine is obviously a big actor, but he strikes me as someone that does roles that he enjoys, and he seemed to have fun on this film. He his character was convincing. His banter and his kind of humour and his relationships with the whole cast, they all seemed to gel. They all seemed very natural. They all seemed to have a good camaraderie that kind of rubbed off as people that probably actually got on fairly well on set. That could be complete codswallop, but that's what it felt like to me when I was watching the movie. So, yes, to clarify, yes, Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast have been absolute dicks lately, but we've moved on. We've put that behind us. For many people, it's actually presented them with these fantastic opportunities to finally commit to and go in a direction that they've kind of thought about for a while. It's been a motivator. We've had big breakthroughs with things being licensed, the Creative Commons license, all these kind of good positives for the kind of the core 5e rules. So we've broken really good ground, and it would be a shame to see lots of people who would enjoy this movie because it's for them cut their nose off to despite their face because they don't want to give big bad wizards any more money. So I would highly recommend you don't be a dwarf and you bury that grudge and you go and enjoy it for what it is. Like I said, it's not going to win Oscars, but it is a fun adventure movie. It is a fun Dungeons and Dragon gamer movie. And like I said, the items that they put into that movie that technically weren't available in D&D, although some of them had got some 3.5 flavour, they are now straight available to put in your game. Should you be like, oh wow, that's a really cool kind of item, I quite like that. It's available, D&D Beyond for free. And again, I think if this gives us a new generation of gamers, I think we're going to be all right. I genuinely believe that. I think they'll have an idea of half decent plots with some peril, with some tension, with some backstory, with some sneaking, with some fighting, with some kind of, some good classic fantasy heroism, and again being representative. I'm not going to go out on a limb and make a huge amount of people absolutely have meltdowns by using the word woke, but this film does a good job of being open and inclusive, which means even if you're a really hateful, angry grognard who hates everyone who's not cis white male, that even includes you, because it's inclusive, so you can come on board too. Happy days. The irony. But it doesn't ram anything down your throat either. So don't go having a hissy fit about the fact that it's going to be going woke and going broke, because it doesn't ram anything down your neck. It doesn't scream politics at you. It just goes, hey, look, these are some cool people. Hey, look, they've got some cool kind of, character abilities. That's just who they are. Move on, and you let it happen. So don't panic about it being like too overly political, because I get that. I get that sometimes things can be really preachy for no reason. But enjoy it, jump in, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And that is where I'm going to sign off. Is it a fun movie? Yes. Is it going to win Oscars? No. Is it good and flavoursome kind of Dungeons and Dragoniness? For the most part, yes. Does it include homebrew? Yes, because it's 5e. So no. Don't get choked up on that. Just go and watch it. Have fun. And like I said, let me know your thoughts when you've seen it in the comments below. Peace.